to a new episode of Diversity Matters, a fireside chat series hosted by the PRCA's Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Committee. I'm Charu Srivastava, Chair of the committee and Chief Strategy Officer and Corporate Affairs Lead at TriOn Co. Today, we have a very special guest with us, Farida Charania, co-founder and CEO of Empauwer. Thank you for joining us, Farida.
Thank you, Charu, for inviting me.
So, Farida, today's topic is about neurodiversity. What is it and how can we embrace it at the workplace? You want to share a little bit more about yourself and how you fit into this conversation, and then we can proceed into the episode.
Certainly. So my name is Farida, and I am the CEO and co-founder of Empauwer. My own background is I'm an economist by education, banker by profession, and perhaps today an entrepreneur by passion. I have so this is my fourth venture, but this is my first impact venture. At Empauwer, we have developed a platform which actually helps companies to work with neurodiverse individuals inclusively, efficiently, and effectively. We use artificial intelligence, natural language processing, etc. So think of it as, technology to enable effective collaboration between the neurotypicals and the neurodiverse.
Thank you. And it's very interesting you talk about that because there's a lot of effort and progress in diversity and inclusion across APAC in the past few years. And while there's been a lot of initiatives tackling various issues under the DEI umbrella, neurodiversity remains a topic that's seldom discussed or tackled. And at the heart of this is a mix of cultural sensitivities and unsaid taboos on the topic, which has created a lack of knowledge and understanding about neurodiversity and in turn neurodiverse people. This can be amplified at workplaces where there's constant pressure to be the best, to do the best. People shy from sharing anything that might show weakness or disability of any kind. As with other topics we've covered in the past, this has created, discriminated, and excluded workplaces. With this in mind, our focus today is neurodiversity. What is it, and how can we embrace it at the workplace? So getting right into the heart of the matter, Farida, what is neurodiversity?
Firstly, thank you, Charu, for inviting me. And I'm very glad I'm here because this is something which is very close to my heart. And it's an opportunity for me to speak to your listeners and viewers and just kind of put forward a viewpoint here. Neurodiversity is basically, so this term was actually coined by Judy Singer, and Australian sociologist who is also on the spectrum. This is basically to, just challenge the pathological description of neurological differences because they were, they were thought to be disorders or diseases. This was basically coined to bring forward the perspective that human brain has a lot of variations and everyone needs to be included. It is not a disorder. So if I were to actually say this in a very simple manner, it refers to natural variation in human neurological function and behavior. There are several diagnostic labels which actually fall under the neurodiversity umbrella. Some of the commonly known ones are autism spectrum disorder, ADHD, dyslexia, etc. But there are a lot of terms like Tourette syndrome, dyscalculia, and so many of them which keep, getting added to this umbrella of diagnostic labels. There is also acquired neurodiversity like a PTSD, etc. So there is so much research which is happening in this, area in the recent years that new labels keep getting added. But to kind of bring it all together, neurodiversity is an umbrella term used to define natural variations in human brain.
That's very interesting. Of course, when you hear it, there's a lot to unpack there. But I think some of the things that stand out for me personally are some of the things that you mentioned and how it manifests itself, right? And it's interesting because, of course, I've shared with you this previously, and I have shared with many people that I've worked with along the way is that I am myself a neurodiverse person. I have dyslexia, which was diagnosed quite late in my life. Traditionally, or I think conventionally, it's diagnosed quite early on. And I had it in late teens when it was first diagnosed. And I used to be very conscious of being dyslexic. And of course, especially being in the communications industry, language is definitely a huge part of what we do. So that, like you talked about, that some of the concerns in the labels of, being dyslexic, there are some even self-founded biases that we have, and it's always an issue there. I've eventually found it easier to be upfront about it. This helped me to ensure that I had some support that I could manage to do my work without compromising on quality and standard. But the thing is that it took me time, right? And oftentimes it was an act of bravery or courage to be so open about it, because it was always, while I was okay to share, it was always a sense of how would the other person accept it, how would they react to it. It became easier over time. And of course, as I became more senior, there was more control that I had around my surroundings professionally. But I do fully understand and I do acknowledge how daunting it can be to be honest about being neurodiverse and the fear of being judged or discriminated or both. Um, and I share this because I do want to understand, you do some amazing work with Empower, your own company. How does being neurodiverse impact or affect people at the workplace? I mean, I have my own experiences, but I'd love to hear from your research and the work you've done. What are some of the ways that they might be discriminated or they might be excluded? And, what are some of the challenges that they face as they go about work in the workplace with some of these neurodiversity, I guess you said, issues that they might have, or the brain is different and special in that sense. So, yeah.
So let me just start with an analogy, and I use this very often. Neurodiverse individuals are Mac, and the neurotypicals who are not neurodiverse are Windows. So they're wired very differently. And the thing is that there is nothing wrong. It's just that 80% of the world is conditioned in a particular way, and 20% is different from them. So that's what neurodiverse individuals are. Now the thing is that they learn to mask their behaviors. They learn to mask this because people are afraid of unconscious bias or even conscious bias in the workplace. The problem is that there are a lot of people even in their 40s who are not diagnosed. They have an idea, but they don't want to get diagnosed, again with a fear of bias. So one thing I would say to people is that, getting a diagnosis does not change who you are. It just explains who you are. So please get yourself diagnosed if you have an inkling that, there is something that you need to kind of address, because you will have better tools and, better control over the way that you actually manage yourself. That is for the individuals themselves. Now, there is no cookie cutter approach, because a friend of mine always says that if you meet one individual on the spectrum, you've met one individual on the spectrum. So they are so different from each other. There is no reason to, kind of box them and, stereotype anybody, because everyone's need for accommodations is different. But the thing is that some of the common challenges which, neurodiverse individuals may face, again, this is not applicable to everyone, but there is difficulty in social interaction, sensory overload, too much noise, too much light, trouble with focus and attention, for instance, that happens a lot. Processing information at a different pace than their peers, inability to understand unstructured information. There are so many things. And what really happens is that people are quick to judge. Whether they, with all the good intentions, the way we are actually taught to kind of, be in a workplace is that this person has a fantastic personality. This person does not have a good personality. Actually, someone who's neurodiverse will not even make it to that step, because they will be, filtered out right in the beginning if these were the yardsticks used to measure. Because let's take an example of someone on the spectrum, for instance. If they interview, the way you and I are speaking, if that person is not making eye contact, not smiling, having a very straight face, we are quick to judge. They are not engaging. But, with some accommodation, they could give you the same value in the workplace. They are able to, do the work and do a fantastic job. But the point is, if they don't have an opportunity, how do they even get there?
Yeah. And it's very interesting what you mentioned in that sense. Like, of course, once you have the foot in the door, there's things to do. But how do we even make it? And perhaps there's no answer for this, but I guess going back to what I shared as well, like how do you make the person comfortable to share? Is there a need for education even beyond just the workplace, for people to understand what it is? It's nothing to be afraid of, nothing to be judgmental about. It's people can be high functioning and still be neurodiverse. So kind of breaking some of the myths and the misconceptions, is there a need for that prior to even someone coming into the workplace? Because I mean, if someone doesn't even uh, share that they're neurodiverse, how do we make the accommodations? It's almost taking a step back into that whole conversation.
I always say this, and I will say it again because this is very close to my heart. Inclusion is good for everyone. Like, for instance, take inclusive design. Again, noise canceling earphones, they were created with people with ADHD in mind, but all of us are using it. Think about automated doors, for instance, created for people with mobility issues, but all of us are using it. So inclusion is good for everyone. Inclusive design is good for everyone. Now, in a workplace, everything starts with education. There is so much of misinformation floating around people have access to information and misinformation. So with all the good intentions, when people try to address something like this without understanding how to do it, it may create more damage than be helpful. So I would just kind of share an example. This is a large company, and someone who is on the spectrum works in one of the departments in that company. And what happened is 3 years ago, when they started working with this particular company, the HR manager tried to coach this individual to be like themselves. Now, this is actually not a good thing, because you are trying to change someone's personality, and that's not possible. And one thing everyone needs to understand, that you cannot change an individual who's neurodiverse. So don't try it. With companies, education is the must. Firstly, sensitize people that neurodiversity is a natural variation of human beings themselves. Secondly, educate them as to why is it important, because a lot of companies and people in those companies fail to understand that inclusion is a business case, because a lot of companies and people in those companies still think it's a CSR initiative. They want to just tick a box and move on. So if that is the premise, it's going to be very difficult to make people feel included. So the first step is that, educate your staff that inclusion is a business case. Think of it this way, 20% of the world is thought to be neurodiverse. Therefore, 20% of your consumers of your services or your products are also going to be neurodiverse. You may know, you may not know, but there is quite a high chance that a certain percentage of your colleagues are neurodiverse. So when you're creating services and products for the world, that voice is necessary to be heard, because that many people are going to be using your services and products. So it is always important to kind of understand that it is just the way it is. There is nothing that you need to kind of just shy away from. So accept it. So I think sensitization, education, acceptance, and finally empowering is very, very necessary. Once that's done, then the organization, is a safe place, and everyone feels comfortable enough to come forward and declare if they need accommodations. The whole idea of declaring that, they have neurodiversity of any kind is to basically make sure that if they need accommodations, those are available. Like, for instance, you have been very open about it, and you have spoken about your condition, and you need accommodations, like you need your laptop all the time with you, because you might not be very comfortable with spellings. I would go a step forward and say you need assistive technology like Grammarly, for instance, because it is important. So these are accommodations which are very personal to you, and these are specific to you. Not everyone needs it. So there are some common accommodations and there are some specific accommodations. Like, for instance, there are some people who cannot function unless they are having some kind of a sound in the background, for instance. So what can they do now? They can't play music in the office and disturb everyone, but the technology has gone so forward, so probably they just get earphones to continue doing their work. They might need accommodations during the interview process by requesting that their interview be more task based, for instance. So there is no cookie cutter approach, but the whole idea is to start educating, because if you do not understand it, there is no way you can make anything a safe place for everyone. People are still going to fear bias, and this is not something which will have instant gratification. If you implement this today, the organization will start seeing fruits of this over a period of time. More people will be encouraged to come forward and declare their neurodiversity. They will have better attrition. So attrition will be managed to quite an extent, and people want to work for companies which are inclusive. So they will have more people wanting to work for them. So how do you create that safe place? By starting to sensitize, educate, and finally empower everyone else in the organization.
Absolutely love what you shared. And I think it goes back to the heart of what I mentioned in terms that it's still part of the whole wider conversation around diversity and inclusion, right? Even as you said, it shouldn't be a checkbox exercise. It shouldn't be a CSR initiative, whether it's neurodiversity, whether it's gender, socioeconomic backgrounds. It has to be part of daily life, and it's part of who we are, right? It's part of what makes us the person we are, the professionals we are. So in every way, I totally agree that companies and everyone around us have to be more understanding and accepting and inclusive of these beautiful differences that make us different and special, in every way. It doesn't have to be a neurodiversity issue that makes us special. There's so many things that make us special, and in many ways they make us bring our strengths in who and how we operate. So I absolutely agree with you. And I think education is so powerful. You mentioned language, sometimes the labels that we have, whether good or bad, and more so in the industry that I'm in communications. You did rightly mention that I can't do without my laptop, which is very true. I always need that. But I think it's also the way we converse. Many times, for instance, it's very common to say someone who's being very neat or being very particular, oh, you have OCD, right? Till date, sometimes when I say, oh, I have dyslexia, people ask me, do you really have dyslexia or are you just saying it? Because it's also said like, oh, you can't spell, oh, you must be dyslexic. Like, it's almost become a little bit of a joke, and these words are very lightly thrown about. So I really want to hear from you, how can we be more mindful, even if we do know somebody is neurodiverse in our circle? Sometimes we forget how to be respectful. The language we use can hurt, can empower. What can we do to be more aware in that situation?
Okay. I think, again, there is no one size fits all. And whatever I'm saying now is my opinion, or, how I feel about it personally. Some people may find it relevant, some people may find it not relevant. The thing is that we always talk about leaving a better world for our children, but we also should try to leave better children for the world. We need to start educating the next generation, because when I was growing up, and there would be a lot of my peers, late 30s, perhaps early 40s, who grew up in the same way that I grew up, where you were told this is normal and this is not normal. It was very common to use words like retarded. If someone kind of falls down, hey, you're blind. And it was very easily, these were words which were very easily thrown around, and that sensitivity about it, that it is not right to do that, was also not there. So we are also getting educated. We are also kind of learning. And the thing is that instead of saying that disorder, deficit, retarded, it can just, you need to remove that stigma. Someone is differently abled. Now, there are some people who prefer to be addressed as disabled. That's a personal choice. But the ideal recommendation is that use words like, say differently abled, because being blind does not mean that you can't do everything that others can do. It will just be a little harder for the person to do everything that others can do, because one sense is not really there, but their other senses are, allowing them to do things. Being hard of hearing does not basically mean you can't do anything at all. It just means that it's going to be a little harder for you to do everything that everyone else is doing, but probably you have developed better senses. So I think the whole stigma around disorder, deficit, retarded, lame. I think these words should not be used. And again, I say this is my opinion. This is not a generally accepted way. But I think, like for instance, I don't say that person is autistic. We basically say this is a person with autism. So it's just not. I mean, you don't kind of start defining. You just say, okay, that's something that this person has got, and we just move on. Yeah. So I think this whole idea of isolating people, stereotyping people is not good. One of the things that, again, very often comes up in conversations is that we all try to be diverse, but we are not inclusive as yet. Because what really happens is that there is so much awareness, and people are also scared that, okay, I'll be perceived as someone who's not inclusive. So let me make my team very diverse. So I have everyone now. So I have, all genders, I have all sexual orientation, I have all kind of abilities and differently able people, different mental abilities, etc., etc. But am I really inclusive? I am still functioning with the people that I think do not have any of these conditions. And I'm just keeping the other people. I'm giving them some work which is not really very important for me as a company to achieve what I want to do. Then I'm not really being inclusive. Yes, it's a little tougher because I will have to get used to it. I will have to understand what is the way that I actually give information. But think about it. Process is good for everyone, because we are so used to giving random, instructions. If I am basically, simple thing, if I'm saying clean my table, I'm just saying clean my table. I'm not saying where do I want the files to be put. I'm not saying where my pen should be. I'm not giving specific instructions. So everyone will understand this in a way that they understand, and they will clean the table in a way that they feel is the best way to clean the table. But if I want a specific output from a specific action, I need to be very clear as to what really happens to my table. And then if I'm doing that, it becomes a process. It's very easy for anybody to follow. So process is good for everyone. So even the way that we give instructions needs to be, kind of processized and changed. This is a topic I can speak till Christmas, but I'm sure we don't have so much time.
No, I think it's a really good example, because I mean, if I think about it, it doesn't just apply to, let's say, different abilities from a sense of or perspective of neurodiversity. Even someone who has different experience levels or different exposures, they would have the similar challenge, right? If you tell a toddler clean my table and you tell an adult clean my table, that's also going to make a difference, because they have different understanding and exposure and experience of cleaning a table. So it's lovely that you brought that up, because I think there's a lot to be said about just being understanding regardless. It doesn't have to be a special inclusion that you have to make people feel accepted. I think it's a nice rule of thumb, I would say, to be in a workplace that's respectful and inclusive of everybody, like I said, regardless. So I think it's beautiful that you mentioned that. It's a good reminder, definitely a good reminder there. Absolutely. So I think I mentioned to you previously the PRCA ED&I committee that I chair. We're working towards creating a charter for the communications industry across Asia Pacific. We wanted to be a base that we could use to kind of create a better industry, and one that's diverse, inclusive, and equal. From your perspective and your work with neurodiversity, neurodiverse people, what is the one thing that you strongly believe should be captured in this charter?
I think, well, there could be many things, but if I were to look at it from a perspective of neurodiversity, inclusion, or neuro-inclusion, then I would say that they should have a strong commitment to creating a neurodiversity inclusive workplace. A workplace which embraces neurodiversity, celebrates unique strengths and contributions of the neurodiverse individuals. This also includes, strong commitment to providing accommodation, support, and opportunities for growth and development.
Yeah, no, that's I think that's a very good thing that we would hope to strive to capture in there. And one last question I would love to ask is, we talked about many things, and as you said, there's so much that still can be discussed and talked about. What is that one thing that, if everyone listening to this podcast, that one thing you would love for them to just perhaps take away one thing that you would like to inspire and motivate them to get started on the DI journey, whether neurodiversity or otherwise. But what's that one thing that you would love to leave our listeners with?
Thank you for asking. And there's a huge, long, whatever, there's a massive list that I can talk about. I think if I were to kind of, just leave a few thoughts with the listeners, it would be that creating an inclusive workplace is not only the right thing to do, but it also makes a very good business sense. I mentioned about at least 20% of receiver of your services or products being neurodiverse. So that voice needs to be heard. Also, diverse teams have been shown to be more innovative, creative, and productive. By embracing neurodiversity, companies can actually tap into a vast pool of talent and unlock their full potential. I think it takes everyone. So I would say let's all work towards creating a world where everyone can thrive, because inclusion, like I said, is good for everyone. It's just not me saying, but this is actually been proven. This is something which is scientifically proven, that inclusion is good for everyone. So let's all work together to create an inclusive world where everyone is able to function to their full potential. And ideally, we shouldn't be discussing these things. It should be part of our fabric.
Oh, absolutely, 100%. I think that's a lovely thought to leave our listeners with. And I personally was really inspired by the vision of Empower that says that a world of equal opportunities when neurodiverse individuals are recognized for their special abilities and not their disabilities. I think that's beautiful. And it really translates to every aspect of discrimination or difference. Let's celebrate our differences and not discriminate against them. So, on that note, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us on this episode of Diversity Matters, Farida. And to everyone who is listening in on this conversation, thank you to our audience. We want to hear from you. We would love to hear your feedback, your thoughts. If you have some topics that you would like us to tackle and to bring in audiences, to bring in interviewers who we could speak on these conversations, we would love to hear from you. You can email us, DM us, or even just comment on the conversation wherever you're listening to it, Spotify, LinkedIn, YouTube. Feel free to share this conversation with your friends, your colleagues, and hopefully we'll see you at the next episode. Thank you.
Thank you.